this afternoon, we're thinking about writing the essay. So we're going to look at the structure. So I'm going to give you some tips for breaking down the essay, the structure of it. We're going to look at writing the introduction, writing the conclusion, and thinking about those body paragraphs. And some of what we cover, a little bit what we cover, will be, I think, a little bit of review of what we've already done, which is probably not a bad thing. So I'm starting with the CRA. Why do you think this is a good place to start when you come to write your assignments? And this assessment makes it reliable and valid so that he's using the same measurements for all of you. What I've done here is taken all the comments from grade 7 because we do not rise to low expectations. Now, I realize some of you in the room will not be thinking, I want a 7. I'm a 7 girl. I went for the 7s. But I realize some of you may be very happy with a pass, and that's absolutely fine. But I want to encourage you, when you look at the CRA, always look at the grade 7 column, because that is obviously what we want to attain to. So I've highlighted here just the main points. I haven't highlighted in-depth, highly sophisticated, but just the main things that you need to cover. So it's understanding key interrelationships, about the factors of the reform, doing a critical analysis of those key arguments that evaluates public value, critically reflecting on personal accountability issues, effective risks management strategies, pinpointing ethical, social, and cultural dimensions, and providing an analysis of management strategies. So they're the main points that you're being asked to do here. And so it's good to have a look at the CRA, not only when you start your assignment, but when you've finished your draft, and just use it as a checklist to think, you know, have I done all of that? And it's also worth looking at the marks as well. So you can see that knowledge and skills is being marked more highly than self and leadership. So sometimes that's just nice to make a note of. And you will also be very thankful to know that there's nothing in this criteria that talks about the quality of your writing. Ooh, isn't that nice? This is a lovely strategy that I learned over 10 years ago that I absolutely loved, because when I saw I had to write 1,500 words or 3,000 words, it really made me panic. I thought, I've never written that much in my life. And so what we can do is actually break that up. So 20% of the total word count is for your introduction and conclusion. So this is a rough guide. So that's 150 words each. So that's not very much. It's not much at all. And then if we take 300 from 1,500, that's a 20%, we have 1,200. So if we divide 1,200 words divided by the number of sections or the number of points or the number of paragraphs, you can then see how many words per section. Now, what I have done here is divide up the sections according to the instructions that Peter has given you. So there's 4 particular parts. So you could, for example, if you wanted to, look at those parts as in for the structure of your assignment. And so you can see each part, you could write 300 words for each. Obviously, this is a guide only. You may not write quite as many words for your introduction. You may not need that many words for your conclusion. One part may be slightly bigger than another part. But what it does, it gives you a starting point. And it's really helpful for time management, because when you go home at night after a full day of work, you've put the children to bed, and you think, you can either think 2 things. You can think, tonight I'm going to do my assignment. When you think that, you tend to think of the whole mountain. Or you can think, tonight I'm going to write my introduction. That's only 150 words. I can do that. That's doable. And so that kind of thinking, it makes it easier for us. It makes this attainable. And so we can think, yes, I can easily write that. I'm going to draft 300 words tonight. That's not hard. And then tomorrow I'm going to review it. And so it means if you have, say, 2 weeks, if you give yourself 2 weeks to do your assignment, or 3 weeks, you can then think, okay, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, I'm going to work on those 150 words. And then over the weekend, I'm going to tackle part 1. And then the next week, I'm going to tackle part 2. And so you can actually manage your time a little bit and plan your time. Does that sound helpful to you? So I loved that strategy because it really broke it down. Okay, so let's have a look at an introduction. So this is a real introduction. I've changed a couple of minor things. I've taken out the place. And I'm not going to tell you all the answers. I'd like you to work this out yourself. So if you look in your workbooks, and I think it must be page 7, I've split this introduction up into sections, and I'd like you to talk with you on your tables and think about what is each part doing? Like, what is the purpose of that information? What is that information doing? What is it giving me? So, for example, I've given you an example, outline of the essay. Which sentence, which part gives you an outline of the essay? So the question is, like, for example, if we look at the whole of the introduction, at which points can we see the outline of the essay? So the answer is actually number 5. And we have, it begins with, before discussing. So think about, when you look at each part of the introduction, think about, what is this piece of writing doing? What is it giving me? What is its purpose? So have a chat with the people on your table, and what you're actually doing by doing this work is working out an outline of how to write your introduction. That's what we're going to end up with. Does everybody understand what they've been asked to do? No. So read the whole introduction, and then look at each part. So you've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. So I've broken it up into 6 parts. Each part has a different purpose. So the purpose of part 5 is to give the outline of the essay. That's the purpose of that little bit. That's what it's doing. That's the purpose. So what's the purpose of part 6? What's the purpose of part 4? What information am I being given? Does that help? Yeah. Yes, all right. So I'll give you a few minutes in your groups to have a chat. What's the purpose of each part? Okay. All right, what I'd love to do is hear collectively your ideas. And this is really interesting, because as I've been walking around, some of your ideas are similar to my ideas. Some of them are a little bit different. So let's just start from the beginning. Number 1, Australia's population growth has been influenced by numerous social, cultural factors and overseas migration. However, this growth is disproportionate between greater capital city areas and regional areas. What is the purpose of that statement? Yes, yeah, it's all of those. So you're setting the context and the issue. Now, when you talk about the issue, are you talking about the issue in a broad sense or a narrow sense? Yeah. It is broad. Okay. Do you agree with that? We're happy with that. So if we think about number 2, what is number 2 doing? It's narrowing it down. So what context? If we've got a broad context for number 1, what do we have for number 2? What context do we have? Yeah, it is specific. But we have, to be specific, we have a government context. Number 3, what is number 3 doing? However, the public value of the form and population numbers is a contested issue. What are we being given there? The issue. It's the problem. It's the overall problem or the issue. And then number 4, the paper analyses the public value of the form for population growth and the implications for accountability and responsiveness. What is that?
An overarching sort of statement of what the intent of the essay is going to be.
Yes, it's the purpose. The purpose. And a very simple way of writing that, and I'm going to give you a sentence starter, the purpose of this essay or paper. Peter, do you prefer paper or essay? Okay, you can use both. Yeah, so we have the purpose. And you can simply write the purpose of this essay is to analyze blah. And you can see, do any words in that sentence, number 4, look familiar from something else that you've read previously? Yeah, well, I'm thinking, not the abstract. The words in number 4 have actually been taken from the assignment brief, what you have to do. They're words that you see in the CRA. So make sure the purpose of your paper that you write actually matches what's in the CRA and in your assignment brief. Otherwise, you'll be going down a rabbit hole that won't be right. Okay, so we've already mentioned number 5 is the outline. And I kind of, you know, when I first started doing this, I kind of thought, how do I write that? So I found an example like this, and I thought, okay, I could use it begins by before discussing how. So if you like that idea of those little phrases, you can write those down, or you can find other phrases in other readings. See how they've done it, to give you a little vocabulary bank of how to actually do this. So if we look at number 6, finally, it argues that the measures to minimize risks need to be appropriate within the social and cultural context of the reform. What do we finish with? What is the purpose of that last statement? Yep, tells me where I'm going. It is a conclusion. There's a word I'm after, and I think I thought I heard it. It's your thesis statement. It's your argument, or as you call it, it could be a hypothesis. Point of view, yes.
It is only the summary point of view. The actual measures aren't listed there.
Exactly, yes. It's the overall argument. Yeah, it's a bit like, you imagine a lawyer in a courtroom. So a lawyer would say, Johnny is innocent. I'm going to tell you 3 reasons why Johnny is innocent. Reason number 1, blah, blah, blah. Reason number 2. But they start with, Johnny is innocent. So they start with their argument, and then the rest of their discourse or dialogue is about why they think that. So in academic writing, we always put like our whole thesis points, our whole argument up front. And then the whole essay is about why I've come to that conclusion, what I've got to support that conclusion. Does that make sense? So what you've done is just written out a formula for how to write your introduction. And this is 148 words. So that's what 148 words looks like. I'm so glad you've brought that up. When do you think is a good time to write your introduction? At the end, yes. Now, if you're like me and you cannot start without starting at the beginning, I have to do a draft first. And it's important to do a draft first, because how can I write my whole essay if I don't know what the purpose is, if I don't know what my argument is? So it's good to do a draft, first of all, but then at the end, when you've finished everything, then actually check it. You know, have you done all of those things? And you can see how an introduction, it starts with that general, broad context, and it comes to the specific. So if you think about your reform, so just think for a moment of the reform in your government department, what you're going to write about. So what's the general overall context of that reform? Not the reform itself, the general context. I think for a moment, let's just, because you're thinking about that, I'd love you to talk to the person next to you. I'll give you a minute each, and just tell the person next to you what the general context of the reform is. And just make it one short, simple sentence. So one really useful strategy with writing, and I have used this in the past when I got really stuck, was talk about it or verbally draft it, record it on my phone, and then play it back and write it down. So if you do have trouble actually getting pen to paper and you just don't know where to start, talk about it with a colleague or record yourself on the phone. And just, now that you know what this structure is, you can just record yourself. And it might be a lot of babble and waffle, but only you hear that. And then transcribe it, and you have the start of your writing. And so that's a really good tip if you're really struggling just getting pen to paper and you're not sure how to start. So that can be very helpful for some people. All right, just moving on to the conclusion, and just for the interest of time, we're not doing this as an exercise. But again, the conclusion, this conclusion, see how that conclusion again starts with that broader context and then summarizes essentially the discussion and then comes back down to that argument. Now, this isn't the most wonderful conclusion in the world. I think they could have written a little bit more perhaps been a bit more specific, but it gives us an idea of what that looks like, and that is a lot less than 148 words. But this conclusion, this whole assignment got, I think, 38 out of 40. So that just going back to my, the breaking up the words, 150, 300, 300, 150. This is an example of a shorter conclusion that obviously worked in this instance. And so they had more of the word count was in the body of the essay. Are there any questions? Yeah, that's right. There may not be any real tight conclusion. And so they've tried to, I think, conclude the main points that they've made. Yeah. And don't forget, this is a small essay. It's only 1,500 words. So you can't attack the whole issue in that little portion of time. So keep the purpose of this assignment really tight. And then, yeah, because you're not going really big, you're staying quite small. Yeah. Has that been helpful to get an idea of how to write those? Okay, so let's have a look at writing the body paragraph. So we may review a little bit what we've already done. This is a paragraph we've actually seen before. We analysed the theme and reme of this. Now we're going to look at it in terms of how the argument was developed. So I think, is it page 8 in your... So I would like you to have a think about how they've actually set up the argument. Is the argument clear, first of all, as you read this? Is there a clear argument? How have they set it up? How have they built it? How have they concluded it? What have they actually done? So again, what you're doing is you're looking at each sentence and thinking, what is the purpose of this sentence? What is it doing? What is it giving me? So I'll give you a few minutes to have a think about that and have a chat with your colleagues. So how has this person set up the argument in this paragraph? What have they done to set that up? So it's actually, I think that's the overall argument, is stating there's a weakness here. But it's starting with current a fact. This is what's happening. And thank you for pointing that out, because I think that's the overall argument, which is excellent. So yeah, so starting with the fact, the context. This is what's happening. And then where do they go? What does the second sentence do? Yeah, it poses a question. It challenges, is this right? Is this the best way to go? So it's a challenge. So we've got the context, we've got the challenge. Then what do they do? Yes, Yeah, provide evidence, and they back it up. And just thinking about the paragraph structure, are there any references in the first two sentences? So that means what? It's their voice. So that's how they're setting up the argument. And then they bring in other voices to back it up, to give the evidence. Then how do they end? Yes, and I just want to read something out to you, because suggesting ways in which something can be improved. Does that ring a bell with the discussion we had earlier? So it's making a suggestion. So it's pointing out, like the whole argument is really pointing out a weakness, but it's using the evidence in the literature to suggest maybe there's more we can do here. In academic writing, sentence 3 is a lovely classic example to introduce the fact that this topic has been talked about in the literature. But it doesn't, you're right, it doesn't say anything. And that's why you must have sentences that follow it that look at specifics. So what does the literature say? Okay, so sentence 3, it introduces, okay, the literature talks about this topic, and then, but whenever you do that, you always need to have at least 3 or more references, or at least 3 references after that. And ideally, you should then use those references to point out specifically what that literature is saying. So I was surprised when this person, they reference all those people, but then they talk about Moore and Bozeman. But why weren't Moore and Bozeman in that original list? And I didn't change that. Obviously, I couldn't change it. But I thought I'll leave it there because I wanted to have this discussion. So I'm so glad you brought it up. So what have we learnt from that? How will we do that differently? So from an academic perspective, and this is me speaking as an academic now, whenever we say that this has been found in the literature, there is an assumption that I've read that literature.
I don't have to, I just have to write it in and then you'll believe it.
You have, yes, there is an assumption. But the key thing is, if we say the literature states or it's found in literature, we must reference what that literature is. And how can I reference it if I haven't looked at it? So the assumption, well, I have looked at that literature. So that's an academic writing convention. But then you shouldn't leave it there because, as you pointed out, it actually says nothing. All it does is introduce it and introduce who the players are. But then the trick is to actually open up what the players say about it. What it does, it really highlights the breadth of literature. And yeah, Bryson, Crosby, and Bloomberg may have written a lot of papers, but those papers are actually the key papers on that topic. So what that enables you to do is, if you've done a lot of reading and you've found in all that reading there's a common theme, that's how you can actually show evidence. Somebody mentioned evidence before in the CRA. That's how you show evidence of the breadth of the literature. But the real meat comes into actually opening up that literature and seeing, well, what do they actually say about it? And what it should have is Bryson, Crosby, and Bloomberg, not Moore and Bozeman. I think this is evidence of someone who's really trying to bring a lot of different things into 1,500 words. Yeah. And so we can see that, and so I think our learning points from that is making sure we make those connections clearer. Because we've now seen an example of them trying to bring everything in to show evidence. I've read all these things, I understand these things, I can see a vague connection, but I think now that we've seen that, we can probably do better, raise the bar ourselves a little bit and make those connections clearer. That was just my really simple, and I just wanted to point out the critical language there, so you can see how they've been critical to help build that argument. Okay, I just wanted to point out a couple of things. I think with referencing, I think we may have covered these, but I didn't cover, if you have a reference that is in the same year, you have 2 pieces published in the same year, we label them A and B, and that's how we reference it if we need to reference them together. And I think we've talked about putting it in alphabetic. We've also talked about the different ways of using the brackets and the ampersands. So, all right, now these questions are really for us to think about how will I organize that information into a paragraph. So let's just do this as a class together, just to do it really quickly. So these are all the facts. Now we know from when we write a paragraph, the paragraph needs to be about just one topic, one thing, one idea. Is there a dot point here? If we want to write a paragraph about just the facts, so imagine this might come after the introduction to set a little bit of background. Is there any dot point in there that might not fit into this paragraph? I'm not sure about number 1. Because I just want a paragraph just about the facts, just about the numbers. So does number 1, is that actually a distraction? Yes. It is. So I would perhaps put that in a different paragraph. Now, so let's look at the bottom 3 points. Is there any one of, or any piece of information in those 3 points that you think that could make a good topic sentence? Because that would be a good way to start this paragraph. The last one? Yeah, all of it or just some of it?
The fastest rate.
Yeah, the fastest rate. That's the general idea, because higher than NT, SA, and WA, that's actually more information. That's detail. And so what would be your evidence sentences, the middle part? Yeah, the first 2. So what you might end up with is a topic sentence about the fastest rate, then you've got your evidence to support that, and then there was nothing there that kind of allowed me to critique or add an argument, so I might have a look at, my list of issues. Is there anything in there that would fit with this? Does that make sense? Yeah, no, you're raising some really good points, and this writing isn't perfect. It got a good mark, but it's not perfect, and I'm glad you can see what can be improved, because that's what helps us to grow in our writing, when we can critique others. My point of this is to think about how we can actually put our notes all together and how we can actually construct our writing. So I just thought I'd show you this strategy in case it's helpful for some of you, just to think about organizing your ideas, thinking about your argument, because obviously if that is what you have, straight away you can think, actually, I don't have enough evidence here. I need to find more. And so you might write this and think, no, I'm not actually happy with that. I can add more to that. But it's the process of putting it together that I think that's what I wanted to focus on. Has that been helpful? Yeah, cool. Now, what have I got on after this? Oh, that's it. What about your dot points? And I just wanted to thank you. I really enjoyed my time with all of you this afternoon. And I might not see you very much again, I'm not sure. But I just wanted to thank you for your time, and I just want to wish you all the best with your help, with your studies. Thank you.